There are photographers who put a stake in the ground that inspires some and provokes anger in others. I'd say if that happens, you know you're onto something. My guest today is known for both his outspoken beliefs and his dynamic images. Welcome to Pixels, where we explore the heart and art of photography. I'm Beth Belo, and I'm so glad you're here. My guest today is Cole Thompson. You're going to hear his thoughts on why ego is the enemy of vision, the value of seizing the moment, and some of the stories behind a few of his favorite photographs. And of course, we talk about his well-known and sometimes controversial practice of photographic celibacy. Cole Thompson is uniquely unqualified to speak on photography. I've never taken a photography class or a workshop. I don't have a degree in art. I've never worked as a photographer. I don't have gallery representation. I'm not a Canon explorer of light. And I only have 3 lenses and none of them are primes. Do I have any qualifications? Just one, my images. Nothing else matters. Besides that official bio, I also learned after we stopped recording that Cole once worked at Disneyland. I hope you have a chance to ask him about it sometime. A special thank you to my video editor extraordinaire, Alex Armitage, and Nick Stover of Nature Photography Classes and his Inspired Creator Grant, which is a supporter of this channel. If you have a creative idea that you want to get off the ground or expand, you can learn more or submit your own application at naturephotographyclasses.com/inspired-creator. I know lots of things are going to stir up for you from this conversation. So please let us know in the comments what was most useful or meaningful to you. We also welcome your likes and shares. Please share this episode with anyone that you think might find it interesting. And of course, I invite you to subscribe and make sure that you enable all notifications so that you don't miss a single episode. If you're listening to this on an audio only platform, you can visit pixelspodcast.com to find the episode page that features the images that we are talking about. Now, let's get to the conversation. Hi, Cole Thompson. I am so glad to be talking to you. As I shared when I reached out to you, I'd done a lot of talking about you in previous episodes, so it was high time to talk to you. So thank you for saying yes.
Well, thank you for having me, Beth. And I'm just only slightly offended that you invited John Barclay before me, but nonetheless, I'll get over that.
Yeah, well, I thought about that when I reached out. I thought, do I preempt the offense? But then I decided it's all good.
I'm glad to be here because I get to talk about the things I'm passionate about. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I like to start out by asking just what's making you smile today?
What's making me smile today? Well, probably the fact that I didn't catch any mice in my car this morning.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, we live on a ranch and we've been inundated this year with mice, and we catch up to 3 mice a day in our cars. So no mice today.
Yay. It's a mice-free day. Do you have a cat? Can you unleash the cat in the car?
They're indoor cats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should put them in the car.
Yeah, just a car cat.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I want to just jump in because a lot of folks are familiar with you. I've already introduced you, but the thing that I was most intrigued by recently, and I heard this on the Cole and John show, which is the podcast that you do with John Barclay. And you made a very bold statement. You said, ego is the enemy of vision. And this was in an episode titled Ego. And that really got my wheels turning. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that. And while you're doing that, maybe share a little bit how I feel a tension that yes, ego is the enemy of vision in that it can become too big. It can become kind of destructive in our pursuit of what's authentically us. And I feel like ego is part of what makes us want to pursue a vision in the first place. So I feel some tension. So I'm wondering, could you just expound on what you mean by ego is the enemy of vision?
Sure. One of the things that I have learned is that it is my desire to create honest work. And I define honest work as work that it was my idea, not borrowed or stolen. I hate that
Mm-hmm.
saying. It was created from my vision. It was created for me, not the audience. And it's work that I can ultimately look at and say, I'm proud of this. I love this. And what I've found is I've just got a naturally big ego. And for most of my life, I was the person who wanted to be seen, respected, have my work published, and everybody would look up to me as some great photographer. And what I have found is that when I'm thinking that way, I am creating for the audience. I am creating what I think others will love, what will be published, what will sell. And that's not my desire. My desire is to create for myself. I love Rick Rubin's analogy that my art is not created for others, but it's like a diary entry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's expressing what I'm feeling. And because I'm terrible with words, I do it through images. But that ego gets in the way sometimes, and it starts wanting attention and accolades. And let's face it, accolades are addictive. Problem
Yes.
is, they only last for 15 minutes, and then we need another and another. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like external validation addiction. And I lived that way for much of my photographic life, never getting anywhere because I was trying to please others rather than please myself. As to your question, is it, in conflict with ego is what makes us want to find our vision? I don't know about that. I want to find my vision because I want to see the way I see, not the way
Mm-hmm.
the experts have told me I should see, not the way my favorite photographers have seen, not the way my mentor has taught me to see, but my own unique perspective so I can make the most honest diary entry.
Mm-hmm. So what you said about the external validation and kind of always needing that next hit of endorphins that comes in this age of social media, it's almost like you can resist that, and short of like turning off, and maybe that's what you do. Maybe you turn off likes and comments so that it just shows up. I guess, how do you balance sort of the realities of these validation driven platforms, and that honest work that isn't dependent on validation?
Well, it's interesting. One of the criticisms I get from this perspective, this point of view, is that people say to me, if you're creating for yourself, then you wouldn't show your work to other people.
Hmm.
And I think there's a difference between the reason why I create and then enjoying meeting with people who have the same sensibilities, artistic sensibilities that I have, who love those dark images, who love the contrasty images, who love those moody images. So there's a separation between why I create. And then what I always say is that getting accolades after you've created honest work is like the cherry on top. The real prize is that you've created something you love. And then when you find others who appreciate it also, that's just the cherry on top. But it's not why you created it. It's not, you didn't create it for them. You didn't create it for that reason. It's an extra benefit.
Yeah. So it comes down to like what's in charge.
Yes. But you constantly have to guard against that ego taking over and saying, wow, the last time I posted this image, it got a lot of likes. I should post another one like it. I just recently read a quote. The worst thing about being successful is that you start to copy yourself. That's worse than even
Interesting.
copying others.
Yeah.
And one of my great inspirations in photography is the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
I, of course, grew up in that era. I remember them coming on the Ed Sullivan Show. But what I love about listening to their music is they were never satisfied to stand still. After their first big album, every record executive was saying, crank out another one exactly the
Yeah.
same way because this worked. And they wanted to go off and do new things. And they're saying, no, 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 do the same thing. It worked. And that's why I love listening to the Beatles. It inspires me to keep growing, to keep seeing differently, to try new things. That's
Yeah.
how I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand is extraordinarily different from Revolution number 9, or these, they allowed themselves to not only evolve but go into new, very out of the box that they
Yeah.
initially were in places.
Yeah.
I also think of David Bowie, who my husband is a huge fan of, and I probably wouldn't know this except for him, that David Bowie, he would adopt a persona, and then when he was done with that persona, it was not alive to him anymore. He moved on to the next. And there were certain songs he refused to play live because
Wow.
they were the ones that everybody wanted to hear.
Right.
There's something both admirable and from an artistic perspective, a little terrifying about that. So it's an interesting thing to think about for ourselves in terms of, I love that, imitating yourself. And when I hear that, I'm thinking like continuing to create the things that get you the most
Sure.
affirmation.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you're not doing it for that reason, it's just a boring way to continue to do the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. How do you reconcile that with, or what's your feeling about niching? Anybody who tells you like pick a lane of style or type of photography, what's your philosophy on that?
Well, over my lifetime, I have been given a lot of advice, and probably I asked for a lot of advice. So some of it was unsolicited, some of it was solicited. And here's a couple of them. One was, you're too all over the place. Pick one genre and become known for that. Another was, you're always centering your subjects. Don't do that. Another was, your images are too dark. There's no shadow detail. Lighten up. Shoot to the right. And for a long time, I maybe tried to do those things because they were coming from people who were experts. And I use that in quotes, experts. But in retrospect, that wasn't me. That wasn't how I felt, how I saw. So once I broke free of that, I was able to do anything I wanted. And I don't want to be known as a landscape photographer, and I hope I'm not. I want to do whatever inspires me and I have a vision for. And I would refuse for likes to go down a single path. That's just not what I want to do.
Yeah. So again, who's in the lead? And vision trumps subject.
Everything. Yeah, I tell people there's many experts, and they may be expert in many things, but there's one thing they can never be expert in: your vision. And most of the advice people give is coming from their perspective and their vision. And that's just not right for you.
And so it's interesting. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is that you kind of are known for a couple of things. When people hear Cole Thompson, at least for me, I envision black and white, and I think of photographic celibacy. And I know we'll probably touch on the photographic celibacy piece in just a moment, but I was curious. In your bio, you wrote, even at this early age, 14, when you were immersing yourself in photography, I found myself drawn to a particular style of image, one that would literally cause a physical reaction in me. They were dark images created by Adams, Weston, Bullock, and others. I knew that I was destined to create such images. So early on, you were eagerly consuming other people's work. When and how did a shift happen that led you to photographic celibacy?
Well, first of all, I want to mention I had the set of Time Life books on photography, and I would pore over those and literally would have a physical reaction when I saw images that I loved. I was in love at age 14, and that consumed me for the next 5 years, where I didn't realize it at the time, but I was creative and I had a vision. I didn't know what vision was. I didn't know what it did. But when I look at those images now from those first 5 years, I had a vision. And then I went through a 30-year period that I call a creative wasteland, where I tried to be successful by following the standard formula. And it's successful back then, and no one ever told me I should define it for myself. So it consisted of 4 things. And I suspect most photographers think this way: fame, fortune, a big name gallery, and a book published. That was successful.
Yeah.
And I never questioned that. And so I went down this path, and it was a miserable 30 years in that I literally have not saved one image from those 30 years. Nowhere. I've
Wow.
got a lot of images from the first 5 years, none
Hmm.
from the next 30.
So they're
And then it
deleted
takes
and gone.
it's just there was nothing noteworthy. It was all
Mm.
just imitations of other people,
Mm.
striving for technical perfection with no spirit or soul.
Yeah.
And then it takes us to the third period in my life from 2004 until today, which I call a return to creativity. And my life was changed by a single question that was asked of me. I went to Review Santa Fe, and that's where you take your work, and you're hoping to be discovered by this room full of publishers and editors and experts and gallery owners. And I got to the last reviewer of the day, and I showed him my work. And he looked at it very briefly and brusquely pushed it back to me and said, "It looks like you're trying to copy Ansel Adams." And I said, "I am. I love Ansel Adams." And then he asked me the question, or he made the statement. He goes, "Ansel already did Ansel. What can you do that exhibits your unique vision?"
Hmm.
And unfortunately, he did it in such an abrasive way that it filled my heart with anger. And it took me a while to get over the anger and to hear the question. And
Yeah.
then I thought, wow, is it really my life's ambition to become known as the world's greatest Ansel Adams imitator? Or
Hmm.
did I have something to say of my own? And that set me forth on a 2-year journey to find my vision. Now, I didn't know what vision was. I didn't know how I could find it. So I just came up with these 10 ideas, things that I thought would help me find my vision. And one of them was photographic celibacy. And that's my reasoning for not looking at other people's work was I had been doing that for 30 years and it wasn't working, following other people's ideas and their vision. And I needed to find my vision. And how could I find it if every day I'm immersing myself in the vision of other people? Because when I saw other people's work, I was either jealous or I'd go out and imitate it.
Hmm.
Sometimes literally, I used to go to Yosemite and try to stand where Ansel stood to recreate his images. So I reasoned if I was going to find my vision, I had to stop immersing myself. I wanted to be like Stevie Wonder, who one day they had a medical breakthrough and he was given his sight. He could see the world and he began photographing with no idea how others had photographed. Now, I
Mm.
knew I couldn't
Hmm.
erase those images that I had in my
Right.
head, but the longer I practiced celibacy and the longer I worked on my own vision, the easier it was for me to see for myself and not through the eyes of others. So that's why I do it. I thought I would do it, find my vision, and then return to looking at other people's work. But I have
Hmm.
found it still is helpful. So I continue to practice it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because of all the people I've known, I've only known one who's tried it for a year, and she said it was helpful.
Hmm.
But so I'm in the extreme minority, and I know most people think it's a crazy idea, and they don't do it. I even had a man once. I was giving a presentation, and in the middle of the presentation, he stood up and he says, "You do what?" And he goes, "Why in God's name would you deny yourself the pleasure of looking at great photography?"
Hmm.
And my answer was, because I want to find my vision more than I want to look at great photography.
Hmm.
What's really interesting, though, is that people who actually get angry at me for my position, and as John and I were at this event, and this person, John's in the audience, I'm on stage, and somebody was getting very upset and making disparaging remarks. And he goes, "Look, he's not saying that you should do it. He's saying this is what he
Right.
did." But
Right.
some people get so angry at the idea. And some
Yeah.
claim it's very selfish of me to want others to look at my work, but I won't look at
Hmm.
theirs. No, I get that.
Well, one thing I think that's important is, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think when there was an episode where you and John were talking about this, I think you were doing like a point counterpoint and each taking the opposite
Yeah, yeah,
perspective, right? But I think it was in that episode you mentioned it's not that you don't look at art,
Right.
It's not like you don't go to a museum and look at paintings and sculpture and other art forms.
Right.
It's just photography
Correct.
specifically.
Correct.
Is that
And a
it?
lot of people criticize me because they believe that all art is built upon other art. So you see
Mm.
a photograph and then you do it slightly differently. And I don't agree with that approach. I want to see uniquely. They say, well, how will you be inspired if you don't look at other people's photography? And I think, well, those people looked at nature and were inspired to create that image. Why can't I also look at nature or the natural world or
Mm-hmm.
man-made world and be inspired as well? Why is it I need to look at photographs, which is their
Mm.
interpretation, and create from that? It just doesn't make sense to me.
So you answered one of the questions I had, which was, are you still practicing photographic
Yes,
celibacy? And sounds like yes. So it's been
yes.
many years
It has
of
been many
that.
years. And, you can't help ignore all photography. Sometimes
Sure.
I was just attending, John and I did a workshop in the Oregon coast, and somebody showed a photograph because it's an after workshop session where they show their
Mm-hmm.
work. And so I'm there and I'm seeing their work. And I saw an image there that it was the same spot that I had photographed, and she did it 10 times better. And
Mm.
it brought up feelings of jealousy, and maybe it was the ego. Oh my gosh, how can somebody shoot my shot and do it even better? So there's several advantages to photographic
Yeah.
celibacy. John Barclay, he's photographically promiscuous, and good for
Mm-hmm.
him.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
You have
what
to
I
find
do.
what works for you. Yeah.
What works
And
for you?
and I think, I mean, do you think that one can practice it for a period intentionally and then and use it as I think of it as like as a way to recalibrate how when I return to looking at others' photos, it recalibrates how I see them.
Hmm.
Um, so using it as a way of resetting the
Or using it
relationship.
as a way to find your vision for people who've
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
yet been able to connect with their vision. So I think it would be a useful tool. Some people claim, I personally am skeptical, I'm not influenced by other people's work. I can look at it and not be influenced. I don't buy it, but I'm only me, so I'm judging from my point of view.
Yeah. And you say, I call BS. It's almost impossible not to be influenced on some level.
I think
Um,
so. And
you know,
now John has made the point to me many times, but look at your vision is been crafted by all of your life experiences. And one of those life
yes.
experiences were you spent 5 years of really poring over other people's work. And that's true too.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
can't change the past, but again, I want to see as originally as possible. And this is my approach.
So as a coach, I'm tuned into words that we can assume everybody understands what they mean, but we can't make assumptions. And so we've used the word vision
Oh
a
my gosh.
lot.
Yes. It is tough, tough, tough word to understand. I
Mm-hmm.
agonized it over for 2 years as I
Mm.
tried to find my vision. It was such this wispy concept that I couldn't grab a hold of, couldn't
Yeah.
understand. And I just thought, after 2 years, I'm getting so discouraged and I'm thinking, I just don't have one. I'm going to give up.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found it, when I understood, it was this little tiny moment where it was like, oh my gosh, it's so incredibly simple.
Mm.
It's so
Mm-hmm.
simple. How could I have missed it?
Mm-hmm.
It's just how I see when I push out all those other voices and I do whatever I see in my head, even though people say it's the wrong way, you shouldn't do this. It's just what I love. And
Mm-hmm.
that's my vision. And finding your vision doesn't guarantee you'll be popular or your images will be loved by others. But
Right.
it provides that internal satisfaction, which is the
Mm-hmm.
exact opposite of external accolades.
Yeah. And to demonstrate how ingrained that external orientation is. Even as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, well, and I'm not, I've read this before and heard this, so influenced by it, that the more you're true to yourself, the more you are true to your vision, the people with whom that resonates will find you.
Oh,
And the people that it doesn't resonate with, it just doesn't.
and then
And,
it
and
doesn't
you,
matter either.
And it doesn't, that's my
Yes.
point. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's like, well, who cares? Ultimately, I suppose. That's not the
Well,
point.
two thoughts, one by Rick Rubin, then one by Brooks Jensen. The first by Rick
Mm-hmm.
Rubin. He said, and I'll have to roughly paraphrase, it turns out that you do your best work for the audience when you're doing the best work for yourself.
Yes.
I love that thought. The
Mm-hmm.
second thought is from Brooks Jensen, that you will find your audience. Now, for some of us, it may only be our wives and our mothers,
Mm-hmm.
but you will find your audience for those who connect, your work resonates with. And really, do you want a big following of people who are just likes on Instagram or Facebook, or do you really want an audience who loves the same kind of work as you? And that's another benefit of exhibiting your work, to find people who have that same or similar vision.
Yeah. And so do you, I don't know if this is fair to ask or not, but do you care what others think of your images? Like,
Well,
truly, do you care?
it has been my experience that the less I care, the better my life is. But there's something in all of us who care when there's a hurtful comment. Like, there's so many things. Like, I get so many people who look at, when COVID came, I grew my hair out and they go, that looks stupid, cut it. I don't care. But if
Mm-hmm.
someone were to say, I met Cole Thompson once, he's dishonest, I would care. That
Yeah.
that is something that I will never want to be known as being dishonest. So there's things we care about and there's things we don't care about. My
Mm-hmm.
photography, I would love everyone to love it, but they don't, because they have a lot of people, 90% of the world seems to love color. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't like my dark style or my contrasty style. That's okay. I'll find my audience and I'll be happy with those who have similar sensibilities. So
Yeah.
do we care? Sure. But I'm working constantly to not care about things that aren't important.
Yeah. Great distinction. And it sounds like I go back to your cherry on top. If somebody likes it, it's the cherry on top.
But it's
Um,
not the prize. The prize is
yeah.
creating work that I love. You
Mm-hmm.
know, as I look at my images, I'm proud of what I've created, and I'm proud to leave those. I know they'll probably not go much further than maybe one or two generations past my death. My kids maybe will hang them on the wall. Maybe my grandkids. I'll be forgotten, but I've left behind something that I love, and that's something I care about.
Well, at some point, there's going to be a young photographer going to that Santa Fe review, and they're going to say, looks like you're imitating Cole Thompson. Cole's already done Cole. Who are you? um,
Or worse, I start imitating myself.
mm-hmm,
I really have to be on guard for that.
mm-hmm. Let's move to some of your images, because I
Sure.
want to hear a little bit about what you've shared and what we can learn
So
from
hard to pick
it.
a few images from many.
I know. Well, that's one reason why I do this in a way. Some photographers say I hadn't looked at them through that lens. And so it was an interesting exercise to consider. So I always hope that it's useful. And so the angel Gabriel, right? Uh, Tell us a little bit about this image and what makes it kind of a pivot point for you.
Well, it's the first image that I consciously created from my vision. As I stood there, I could see it in my mind. And what I've learned is that becomes a roadmap. Um, can I tell the story of how it came about?
Oh,
Because
yeah. Yes,
I think
please.
that's kind of important. Some
Mm-hmm.
people say the story isn't important, but I think sometimes it is. I
Mm-hmm.
was photographing here on the Newport Beach Pier on a hot summer day, and there's lots of people walking past me, but I was using a long exposure, and so they almost all disappeared except for the few who lingered there on left and right of Gabriel for a second. And the image was somewhat interesting. It had this great converging line. I loved how I had centered it, etc. But it was lacking something. And I realized it was lacking a subject. So I was looking around for someone who I could ask to stand in the image when I saw this homeless man who had just reached into a trash can and brought out some uneaten French fries and was eating them. So I approached him and asked if he would stand in the photograph. I would take him to lunch afterwards. And he was very reluctant, very suspicious of my motives, which I thought was hilarious. But he agreed, and he wanted to hold his Bible. And it turned out his name was Gabriel. So I called the image the angel Gabriel. And then afterwards, Gabriel and I went into probably a 4-star restaurant, a very nice place. And here he is, barefoot, filthy with matted hair. And as we sat and looked at the menu, I said to Gabriel, order anything that you like. And he said, I'd love a steak with mushrooms and onions. I haven't had one in years. And when the waitress brought it, he picked it up and ate it with his hands. Gabriel was a delightful fellow. He had been a drug addict, but was now clean. And it turns out he and his father escaped Romania during Ceausescu's reign. And I'm half Romanian. So we talked about that. I learned about my real name. I was adopted. My real name is Cole Tatar, but I always pronounced it Tater. And he's registering a blank. And then I wrote it and he goes, Tatar. And so we just had a delightful time. And as we were getting ready to part ways, I learned that his father lived nearby. And so I said, Gabriel, give me his name and address. And if I sell any of these images, I'd be happy to share a portion with you. To which he replied, give it to someone who can really use it. I have everything that I need. And Gabriel walked away with his only 2 possessions, that Bible and a bedroll. And I go back every year to Southern California several times, always go back to the pier looking for Gabriel. Never seen him again, but on my last visit, I did talk to another homeless man who said he had seen him 3 days earlier. So I know he's still around and hopefully in good health. So the reason I love this image is threefold. I love the image. I love that it was my first time consciously creating from my vision. And it changed my outlook on how I dealt with homeless people from that point on. I try whenever possible to take them to lunch and to learn something from them.
And now I'm looking at this image and there's a halo effect around him because of the way the light is. I don't think I'd appreciated that before. There's something very magical about it. And as you're telling the story, I know on your website you have recorded like short audio snippets of backstories or, behind the image kinds of explanations or descriptions. What led you to decide to do that? Because I don't think I've certainly seen narratives, but I like that you did an audio.
Well, I never believe in explaining the image, what it means, but I do like telling the story about how it came about. The stories are special to me, and I just thought maybe others would find them interesting. Sometimes they teach a little lesson. Some of the stories, like the Windmill and Moonlight, which I think we've got included. Not sure if we have Windmill and Moonlight included, but there's sometimes life lessons in there, those little stories. So,
yeah. That's certainly true for this one. And it seems like in the age of AI, those kinds of stories and that personal connection is even more powerful and important. So
maybe I should have AI run through my stories and see if they can enhance them some.
Enhance them, clean them up, and embellish.
Embellish is the word I was thinking, yes.
That's great. Well, tell us about this one that we're looking at now.
This is an image that really, really has an important message. This is from my series, The Ghost of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And again, I'll have to tell a story to make this image make any sense. I was visiting my son in Ukraine. He was there in the Peace Corps, and my wife and I visited him. And how I always go to a new location is I don't do any preparation, no reading of books, no guidebooks, no looking at other people's work. I go there with a completely blank slate, hoping to see something that will inspire me. And while in Ukraine, I was fortunate to create a series that I love, is called Ukrainians with Eyes Shut. And it's become the message so important now with what's happened in Ukraine. Yeah. And then afterwards, we had a couple of free days, so we decided to take the train over to Poland. And I got to tell a humorous story and a little interlude here. When you hit the border of Poland, the train stops. Stern, stocky women in these green uniforms come on with stern guard dogs, and they question everybody and show the passports. And while they're doing that, a team of 4 people go to every car on the train. They disconnect every car. They jack the cars up in the air, disconnect the wheels, and roll all the wheels out from under the train. Then they roll a new set of wheels in, reconnect them to the cars, drop the cars, reconnect them, and you go on your way. This all takes place in an hour. It's because Ukraine had been invaded so many times by outsiders, they changed the gauge of their rail line so invaders couldn't just come rolling in. Hilarious. So we get to Poland and we stay in Krakow. And we're discussing what we should do with our free time. Now, I knew Auschwitz-Birkenau was nearby, but I didn't want to go because I'm an empath. I take on the feelings of people, places, things. But the family outvoted me, and so off we went. And while we were on the tour bus heading to Auschwitz-Birkenau, I started thinking about where we were going. And I thought, wow, if there is a sacred place on earth, this has to be one of them. And so I decided that I wouldn't photograph there. I thought it would be disrespectful to treat it like a photographic opportunity, or maybe even sacrilegious. So we're getting off the bus, and I asked the driver if I could leave my gear on board, and he said no, he wouldn't be responsible for it. So fortunately, I began the tour with gear in hand. We began the tour by looking at a book with a beautiful black and white portrait of each internee, prisoner, I don't know what you call them, with a description of their life, their belongings, their education. And I'm studying this black and white photo, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a good photographer. He really took his time, and he had pride in his work. And then I start thinking, why are they so carefully documenting somebody they're just going to work to death or murder? And it just got my head spinning. And then they took us into the room with the iconic piles, the pile of glasses, the pile of human hair, and the pile that got to me, the pile of human bridge work yanked from the mouths of the dead. I'm not claustrophobic, but in that moment, I could not breathe in that room, and I signaled to my family that I was leaving. They should continue the tour. And I went outside, and I just started walking slowly, looking at my feet, trying to catch my breath. As I began to breathe easier, I just started thinking about my feet. Who else had stood here and was now dead? Who else had walked in the same path that I was walking on their way to the gallows or gas chamber? Then I just started wondering, metaphorically, if their spirits still lingered. And then something just said to me I needed to photograph their ghosts. And it was inspiration. And I knew from previous experiences that when you feel it, you must do it right then. So I began photographing ghosts. By using the other visitors in the camp and a long exposure, I turned those visitors into ghosts. And so once being concerned about being disrespectful, I now found myself literally running from location to location, trying to capture these images that I had in my head, because I only had 45 minutes left at Auschwitz and then another hour at Birkenau. And I knew I would never be back. I had to get what I saw in my head documented. So that the lesson, great lesson from this image is when you feel inspiration, you must act immediately. Not tomorrow, not I'll come back next week, not I'll learn some techniques. I didn't know how to create these ghosts. You just got to do it.
Yeah. And you took something that initially you felt like you didn't want to disrespect, and what you ended up doing, at least in my view, is honoring. There's something extraordinarily respectful and honoring of what happened there, helping us to relate to it in a different way. Like in an odd way, it humanizes it.
Yeah. I've seen other people photograph the death camps, and they treat them like historical places, you know. They've been dead for 50 years, and here's what remains. And I wanted to do something different. And, you know, it was interesting. I exhibited this work at the Dallas Holocaust Museum. They had built a new gallery. I was the first exhibition. I was there for opening night. And I see a woman being pushed in a wheelchair from image to image. And as she got to each image, she would crane her neck really far forward and just really examine the ghosts. And so I went up and I said, "Hi, my name is Cole, and these are my images." And this woman, Edith Molnar, raised this arthritic, crooked finger and pointed at the images. And it was shaking. And she said, "These are my images." Edith Molnar had been interned at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I can't imagine what feelings that might have stirred up.
Yeah.
But I've been so happy with that project and being able to meet so many survivors, because there's, like our World War II veterans, there are very few left.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Excuse me. Just thinking about that. Yeah, that's, I don't really have any words except thank you for acting on that impulse. And yeah, giving this to those of us who have no clue what that would have been like. And then,
Oh, I heard stories that were just remarkable, both in their man's ability to be cruel to another man, and also remarkable in this will to live and what these people did to survive. Just, and for me, it's never been about the numbers, the Holocaust. I don't care if it was 100 people, 1 million, or 10 million. It's man's ability to be cruel to another is just staggering sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Truly heartbreaking. Oh, well, thank you for the story and those images. Let's take a look at, it's like, how do I move on from that? So let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. What are we seeing here?
Oh, another lesson and inspiration. I had read Thor Heyerdahl's books. He was a great adventurer back in the 50s and 60s. But the one book he wrote that just stuck with me my entire life was Aku Aku, his adventure to Easter Island. And my whole life I dreamt of Easter Island and the Moy of Easter Island. And so one year my wife and I were creating a bucket list, and I just said out loud, "Well, I'd love to go to Easter Island, but of course that's impossible." And my wife, not knowing any better, said, "Why is that impossible?" So off we went the next year. We spent 3 weeks there. And while we were flying there, I had a dream that the Moy were actually living beings, and that I had taken 2 big stands and a big roll of backdrop paper and set up an outdoor studio. And then I went and invited all the Moy to come and sit for a portrait. And most said no. They did. I didn't know they had been so poorly treated by outsiders. They were very wary.
Yeah.
And others said they were too old or too infirm to make the journey. And even the younger ones said they didn't want to run into other clan members whom they had a dispute with. So after issuing the invitations, I wasn't certain if anyone would show up. Well, the day and hour came, and at first no one did. But then slowly some of the younger Moy came and sat for a portrait. And as word got out, more and more of the Moy came. Well, I woke up from that dream, and I told it to my wife, thought about it for a bit, and then said to her, "You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to invite the Moy to come sit for a portrait." So I created this series of portraits of the Moy of Easter Island. And it was such a privilege to go there, much less get to meet them, because, they're all so distinctly different.
Yeah.
And each one has a story. There's one Moy who has his back turned to the camera. He won't turn and face the camera because he has bullet holes he wants to show on his back. The early explorers used to use them as target practice. So that was another one that just illustrated to me when you feel inspiration. And I could have said, like I did with Auschwitz-Birkenau, I don't know how to do that. But that's not the hard part. Learning how to do something isn't the hard part. It's the idea. Yeah. So I learned new techniques and I figured it out. But you just can't say, "I'll do it later."
Yeah. And that's another instance of the vision leading over the technical side of things and letting that be in charge. It's also evidence, if I could offer, that neither of the Auschwitz, even Angel Gabriel, and none of those came because you were looking at other people's photography and said, that's an interesting idea. No. And you were immersed in your environment and you were open to what that environment had to tell you. And so then what emerged was you from that.
Yeah, if I would have looked at other people's work at Easter Island or at a death camp, my work would look completely different.
Mm-hmm. Is the next image, is this part of a pivot, or is it part of a point?
This is just my favorite series, the Harbinger series.
Mm,
I just really stumbled upon this
yeah.
single cloud. I had just been photographing those mud hills, and my son was with me, my 13-year-old son, and he's complaining and moaning and groaning. And I finally just kind of gave up, and we were headed back to the car. When I looked back at these mud hills, dark mud hills, lovely hills, and I saw that single cloud moving quickly across the top. And I could see that in a moment it would be right centered above my two hills there. Mm-hmm. So I yelled to my son, Jem, we're going back up, and we ran up. I got the tripod up, got the camera on, got my one shot. Yeah. And I always name my images the first word that comes to mind. That becomes the name of the series. And the word that came to mind was harbinger, an omen of things to come.
Yeah.
And I never dreamed or believed that I would be able to do a series. I thought that was a one-off single image, greatest hit that I would never be able to duplicate. But I've now got a whole series of them, because when you're passionate about something and you're looking, you start to see things that you might have overlooked before.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you buy a pink car, suddenly you think there's nobody who's got a pink car. Then you see them everywhere.
Everywhere. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is just my favorite series. And that was the first one. Yeah, and one of my favorite ones. I just love that image.
It. Yeah. So would you ever, and this series is a good example of this, what if you saw like, oh, this is well, it might not be perfect depending on your answer to this question. This is a perfect scene, but there are 3 clouds. Well, I can just remove the other 2 and just have the one, and there's my image.
Sure.
What's your line when it comes
Everybody's
to that
got their own line. That's a great point. Everyone's got their own line. My line is, I will remove small things that bother me. I will not add things. For example, I never would have shot that and added that cloud. But this, the before image, which you can see on my website, has a little cloud, and I removed it. So that's my line.
Yep. Yeah. Cool. Yep. Good thing to think about. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned a few minutes ago about advice. Advice that you'd been given. Is there any advice in particular that stands out to you because it was either really good or really bad?
Well, I already mentioned the 3 things that I'd heard so often, which was really bad. And it just illustrates that it might not be right for you. And I know there's a lot of people who say, yeah, but if I show somebody my image and I ask them for advice, they might say something that resonates, and I might pick up a way to improve the image. And here's my answer to that. If they can see the potential flaw or ways you can make the image better, why can't you learn to see that and critique your own images? I think that's so important that we learn to critique our own images and not rely on another expert. And so when people ask me, what would you do with this image, Cole? And I'll say, well, tell me, do you love this? That's important to me. If they don't love it, then you need to move on to another image. What's strong about it? What's weak about it? What could you do to bring that strong point out more? What can you do to minimize those weak points? And I tell people what I do is I'll process my image, let it sit for a week, come back, make tweaks, come back in another week, make tweaks. And I keep doing that until there are no more tweaks. And then I know the image is done. And I recently talked in my newsletter how I had released an image early because I was anxious to get it into my last newsletter, and it was not done. And I later fixed it, and it's so much better. But I was in a rush to get it out. And Brooks Jensen talks a lot about this, the effect of Instagram. Take a shot, get it right out there. Get it out immediately so you can have a new shot of your meal every day. I don't know. So
Oh, thank goodness my feed is not filled with those. Um, right. But I think you and John, again, you did an episode on this recently. Like, what's your process in terms of both how you, not just, the technical of how you process, but how soon you share an image with
Yeah.
people? How do you decide?
Yeah.
Another thought-provoking question. It made me think about sometimes I think I jump too early because I'm excited about one. My eye becomes more discerning if I get a little distance from it.
I think I've released images that later I trashed, and I regret that I released them because they weren't ready, and I didn't love them, and I didn't keep them. But early enthusiasm sometimes gets us to do
Yes.
things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had this strange phenomenon, and because I do both color and black and white. If it's in color, if I'm editing it at night, I overdo things. I
Huh.
over process a bit, and then
A
I
little
come
too
back
much
the next
wine?
morning. Say that again?
A little too much wine?
Maybe that's it. Yeah, that
Uh,
must be it. But yeah, and then I come back the next day and I'm like, ooh, that's a little, the sliders are over a little bit too far to the right, or, that sort of thing. And so
yeah,
I back
absolutely.
off, and just noticing that has helped me to be more patient. Like, okay, just because I'm like, oh, that's cool, and post it right away. Just give it a little breathing room. And something you said about the learning to critique your own images, learning
Mm.
to look at them through those kinds of eyes. I love that the questions like what is distracting, and what do you want to bring out more? What's strong about it? What's distracting? And allowing ourselves to learn how to do that for ourselves. Because if I were to show an image to you, what you might perceive as distracting or the main point or strong might be different than what I do.
Oh
And if
my
I'm going to be
gosh.
true to
Yeah.
my vision, if my big thing was like, I love that branch in the corner, that's what makes the photo. And you said that branch is super distracting. Yeah.
Now, Beth,
Right.
somebody on the John and Cole and John show brought this story up. I wonder if it was you. They talked about this scene, and they had waited for this bird. And I guess this bird landed. They took the picture. They thought it was great. They show it to their judge, I guess at their camera club, and he critiques it and says, well, it would have been better if that bird wasn't there. Because
Yeah, that's great.
she, in her vision, that was what made the image. In his vision, it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I say other people's opinion, they're worthless. And because it comes from their vision and their
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
So learn to critique for yourself.
Yeah. I will share this and then I'll move on because it's bringing up a memory that I had forgotten about around sometimes watching, like for Out of Chicago, they'll do these photo reviews,
Yeah.
and I will, if I'm watching the recording later, when they show the image before the expert can comment on it, I'll just pause the video and look at it for myself and say, okay, what am I seeing? What do I feel like works? What would I comment on, just as a way to sort of practice looking at it through that kind of lens. And there have been times for sure when I thought, oh, I would get rid of that thing, or I would make that the focus. And then the opposite would be either what was advised or what was stated as the intention of the photographer. And it's that reminder that we're all seeing it through different ways,
Yeah.
and you have to decide for yourself, and you have to have the courage and confidence to stand by that. That if
Yeah.
Cole Thompson said that branch is distracting, and I'm like, yeah, that photo's all about the branch, I'm going to keep the branch.
Great point, because too often we have a photographer we respect and we'll
Mm-hmm.
ask their opinion, and we somehow think that opinion is
Yep.
more valid than our own, and it isn't. If Ansel
Yeah.
were here today and he was my childhood hero and he looked at one of my images and says, you should do this, which I don't believe he would, but
Mm-hmm.
you should do this, I really would have the ability to say, no, I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what bothers me about these camera clubs so often. I shouldn't say they're all this way, but the unsolicited advice, and even worse than unsolicited advice, is you going to another person and saying, what do you think of this? What would you do to it? I say, stop doing that. Learn to see for yourself.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the image that's up here, and I absolutely adore this image. I love the movement in it. And I can imagine a camera club would be like, ugh, there's nothing in focus. There's, whatever it is. What is it that you love about this image,
Well, the experience, for one thing. I was on a 12-hour train ride from Fairbanks to Anchorage, and I was thinking, man, I'm going to have an opportunity to see these grand vistas and Mount McKinley. And in reality, what I saw was I'm in a tunnel of trees speeding through it at 50 miles per hour in a blinding snowstorm.
Yep.
So I went between two cars and opened up the doors so I could shoot outside the car. And I started photographing. The only thing there was to see, the trees. Then I started panning to try to stop the motion. Then I thought, what would happen if I used a long exposure and I panned with the trees? And it turns out that this intersection of sideways motion with our focal plane shutter going up and down creates the swirl, as I call it. And so for 12 hours, I was in just experimenting and trying to learn to control the swirl. So this is a series called Trees from a Train. And just had a lot of fun with it. And, it sparked a memory. Brooks Jensen did a audio recording in his series, Photographers Who Inspire Me. And what he said about me was that I was curious. And that resonated. And I thought, I am. Whenever I see something, I'm always looking to see what can I do. And that's what that curiosity led to this little discovery and this delightful little project.
Yeah. Seems like that's another benefit of the photo celibacy, because it seems like maybe you're more likely to ask what if and follow that curiosity, because you don't know that it can't be done or you're just more willing maybe to take some risks.
You showed me the photo of the Harbinger. If I had been looking at other people's photos and had seen a single cloud like that and then ran off and did that project, I never could have, because I would have said, well, that's dishonest now. It was someone else's idea. But there have been other times where I've created a portfolio and submitted it. And this happened on my Dunes of Nude series. And I submitted it to Lenswork. And he said, oh, we see these all the time. It was original to me. It was created honestly, but apparently so had a lot of other people. So it doesn't guarantee that I'll create original work, but it is original to me and it is honest to me. And that's an important distinction.
Yeah. I had a similar experience, and it took place from a train, where I was on a train from Chicago to, Michigan. And looking out the window, I was noticing power lines. And so I just started photographing the power lines and, from this moving train. And I posted on Facebook, and somebody comments, oh, have you seen Cole Thompson's Power Line series? And I'm like, damn it. I haven't. And should I look?
But if you come by it honestly, it's fair game.
Right. That's kind of how I feel. It's like, well, that was still of course, my images are completely different, because it's like my interpretation, the way I saw them. The circumstances are different. My motivation for taking them is different. And so it's still honest, but I sort of felt like, oh, can I share these now? I don't want to look like I'm copying, but I didn't know about the Powerline series and I just did it. So it's an interesting move.
Well, I had somebody write me and tell me that they had seen some guy who did single cloud photos. This happened probably within the year, but I had never seen him. But
yeah. There's nothing new under the sun.
Probably.
And the way we see it is only the way we see it. So that's what we have to trust.
Yeah.
Well, what do you feel like has been the biggest surprise to you on this journey of photography you've been on for so many decades?
That it took me so long to figure out that vision is the answer to most everything in creating the type of work that I want to create. And that I struggled because I didn't think I had a vision. I've come to learn everyone does. You can't not have a vision. It's just how you see. But we bury it under so much crap, all of the
Yeah.
rules and the common wisdoms and the advice, it's to the point that we've stopped listening to it for so long, it atrophies and almost disappears. For so long, I said, I don't have a vision. And people will say that to me. I don't have a vision. You might have one, but I don't. You do. You do. And along with vision, I never thought I was creative. I grew up in a house where we focused on eating, not on piano lessons or studying art or going to museums. And so I grew up believing I wasn't creative. But as I found my vision, I realized that I was. But it was kind of like a muscle. It hadn't been exercised. It hadn't been trained. It hadn't been taught. So to learn that I am creative, I do have a vision, has probably been my biggest surprise. But sadly, it came later in life, and I wished, and that's truthfully why I do these presentations and I speak to people, because I want to help people not spend 30 years wandering in the wilderness like I did. And I just emphasize, find your vision, find it fast. And a lot of people will tell me, well, I've been trying, but I just haven't been able to find it. And I will say, well, how much time do you spend on the technical versus how much time do you spend on finding your vision? When it becomes the thing that you want more than anything else, you'll devote that time and the energy to finding it. And that's why John and I are going to start these vision workshops to help people. We can't help people find their vision. We can only tell them what we did and hope that some of those steps will be useful on their journey. It's a solitary journey. It's a painful journey. It's a difficult journey because you got to be so incredibly honest about your motives.
Yeah.
That we're all creative. We all have vision.
Yeah. It's not like you can just like spend a couple hours thinking about it and boom, there it is.
Or take a course on it and come out with a certificate.
Course. Yeah, exactly. Sign up for Cole and John's course and all of a sudden it's boom. Nope. It takes practice and patience. And I have to say, like, even for myself, I don't know what makes my images mine still. I just know that they're mine. I do feel like it's kind of important to be able to put some words around it, at least for me. But I've become more generous with myself of not needing to have a label for everything, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I probably need your vision workshop. How do you handle times when you get stuck? Like there's a creative block of some kind. What helps you through that?
Well, everyone does. Everyone does multiple times. And what I've learned is you embrace it and let it do its thing.
Yeah.
I look at a creative lull like a farmer leaving a field to lay fallow for a season to rejuvenate it. And you just let it happen and you enjoy the downtime. And when you feel creative, and you will again, you come back with new vigor. But I've learned, for me, there's no forcing it.
Yeah.
I've tried shooting through it. I've tried so many things, and I've just learned, enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's a part of the process. It will come back. It always does.
Yeah. I wonder if that's part of the fear. You forget what it feels like. It goes on long enough. You forget what it feels like and you wonder, am I ever going to get it back? And so you force it.
You always wonder if you think, am I done? Is this it?
Is that it?
I've lost it. No, it always comes back. It just needs a little break. Enjoy it.
Yeah. I keep coming back to trust, trust that it's in you, trust your capacity for it. It'll come. And it won't come if you force it. Or at least it's going to be less pleasant.
That's been my experience.
Yeah. And along those lines, any particular challenges that you feel like have been sort of either self-created or thrown up in your way that have slowed you down? And what have you done about that?
Oh, I think the challenges have just been, again, that ego, that creating for the wrong reason. And it's not something you overcome and then you're done with it for life. You have certain tendencies, and mine is to always go to to indulge the ego and do things for the wrong reasons. And so you're just always having to keep yourself in check.
Yeah. 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 I was just thinking like doing a gut check of who is this for?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been starting to incorporate a question towards the end of my conversations about who else should we be looking at and following. And I like to emphasize it doesn't have to be a photographer, because as we've talked about, we garner energy from a lot of different places and sources. So is there anything in particular that you have found energizing, recognizing everybody finds something different energizing for them, but what have you found that's energizing that you find yourself maybe sharing with other people more often than others?
Yeah, I think this first one, I have 3 books that are my go-to books for inspiration that really remind me of doing things for the right reason. One is The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. Howard Rourke is the main character, and he's an architect who creates from his own vision, but it goes against what everyone else is doing, and everyone else tries to punish him and tries to get him to conform. That's always gives me great strength, that book. The second is Edward Weston's day books. They were his diaries from his time in Mexico. He destroyed most of his diaries, but saved these 2 volumes. And I read those, and they really inspire me, his whole process. And the third is a fairly new one. It's The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Yeah. Everything Rick says, I'm just finding myself saying, wow, if I could have said that, I would have, but I can't. So
right. Darn it, he said it first.
Quote Rick. But just amazing stuff on creativity. And something he says at the very beginning of the book. He goes, nothing in this book can be proven to be true. But this is what I've learned, what I've experienced in life. So just 3 books that I find myself going to really give me a shot in the arm, recenter myself, create for the right reasons.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll make sure that there are links to that in the show description so folks can check them out. And I think I'm about halfway through The Creative Act and the audio version.
Me too.
And this is inspiring me to get back on it. And because it's so much wisdom. Well, what's the best way for folks to connect with you and maybe tell us a little bit about the things that you've got going on, like the Cole and John show and the vision workshops? How can folks get clued into all that?
Well, if they wanted to attend a workshop, I do them with John a few times a year. So they can go to his website. And beyond that, they can find us on YouTube, the Cole and John show, not the John and Cole show, the Cole and John show.
No ego there? Is there any ego there?
It's alphabetical. I was thinking about that.
It's alphabetical. Okay, if that's what you want to say. Cool. Well, I will also make sure that there are links to that so folks can connect with you. Well, it's been delightful talking with you, Cole. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let us know in the comments what was most useful or meaningful to you, and be sure to subscribe so that you're notified of future episodes. This channel is made possible in part by Nature Photography classes and their Inspired Creator Grant. You can learn more or submit your own application at naturephotographyclasses.com/inspiredcreator. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.